Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about the importance of college essays. For those of you who do not know us, my name is Jordan Holmes. I am the Assistant Director of College Admissions here at Ivy Experience. Alyssa Coltrane is my colleague here. She's the Director of College Admissions here, as well as Kevin Trudell, the Senior College Admissions Specialist. And the three of us all work with students on their essays and applications. And well, today we'll be talking about, again, the importance of college essays in the context of the application process. And we'll start tonight with Kevin telling us a little bit about what is in your control, including essays, but all the factors that students have in their control in this process.
Sure, thanks, Jordan. So here's the thing. There are certain things you don't have control over in this process. If a school you're applying to wants a student from all 50 states and they're saving a seat for a kid from Wyoming and you're not from Wyoming, you don't control that. However, here are the things you do control. As you can see listed on the slide here, grades, test scores, extracurriculars, recommendation letters, essays, and applications. But here's the thing. A lot of these, as you can kind of guess, are kind of baked in because your grades, you've been working on that the past 3 years. They are what they are. Your extracurriculars, whether you have leadership and depth in that extracurricular, you've been building up the past few years. Same thing with recommendation letters, right? Um, so where that leads us, what's left, right? That you can control in this time frame, end of junior year, beginning of senior year, and that is essays and applications. Now, um, these essays and applications are becoming incredibly important because it is at this point in time what sets you apart from other students, right? All colleges that are competitive, that are highly ranked and highly regarded, they have good students with strong grades and strong test scores. So here's the opportunity to use your voice, your background, to tell your story, to provide context to the admissions office that really will help you separate yourself during this process. So, I mean, so here's the thing, right? When should I be working on my college essays, right? Uh, so here's the thing, like I won't go through the full bit of this because we're halfway through this timeline already. But the long and short of it is we suggest getting an earlier start rather than a later start for a reason, right? You or your child may have been working really hard the past few years to get good grades, to really prepare yourself for this moment, to do well in a standardized test score. If you're working on your college essays a week before they're due at 1 a.m., you're really selling all that hard work short, especially for something that does carry a fair bit of weight during this process. So, you should be, working on, ideally in the process of working on your Common App materials, so that you can set yourself up to really have a lot of that work done before the school year starts, right? Um, the second big reason you should really think about extending this timeline, working on this now, is to give yourself a sense of balance, right? Because senior years are stressful time, right? You're taking your hardest classes, you're in your leadership sort of positions, handling the most you have had for your extracurriculars. So to be able to enjoy your senior year, live that full life, do well, um, you want to get started sooner, right? Get most of that work done before senior year starts. Because, as you can kind of see by the third bullet point there, your senior year grades count too, right? As me and Jordan can attest to as former admissions officers, it's good to see upward trajectory in your grades, right? So if you are taking your harder classes junior and senior year and your grades go down, that's a bad sign. So getting this work done over the summer, getting it done mostly before school starts, will really set you up for success in your year. Okay. So, when should you write your college essays, right? As we kind of saw in the time before, you should be starting some of these materials already. But, the college essays are the personal statement, but they're also supplemental essays for the different colleges as well. There's a lot of work involved here. And something we do want to emphasize is you don't want to be waiting, sort of putting all your eggs in that early decision, early action bucket or basket, and hoping for the best, and then waiting for that decision, and then I'll do my regular decision work based on that outcome. You should be doing that now, or as soon as you can, because here's the thing, right? And we've seen it several times before working with students. if you don't get into your dream school, and we have our fingers crossed and we hope you do, but if you don't get into your dream school and you're in that kind of 2 week rut where you're processing that, you're not feeling well, you're kind of down, maybe a little depressed, you don't want to be writing, right? Your next group of essays, right, for your regular decision schools, which are still very important at that point in time. So, you want to be working on this earlier rather than later. Ideally, students should have all their essays written and their applications prepared by the fall of their senior year. So, it's one of those things that you should be ready to, you should have your materials done, your essays and applications done well before you plan to submit or well before these deadlines pop up.
So that is one of the major myths that when we work with students, we work to try and dispel this idea of it's fine to just write, your Common App personal statement and your supplements for that single school, and then you wait and you hear back. And hey, on the upshot, if you get in, then you've only written your supplements for that school. If you don't, then you're writing your supplement essays for a whole lot of schools in 2 weeks while crying. No one wants that. That ends with a student crying, that ends up with us crying. But before we launch too far into exactly the kinds of essays that students will have to write over the course of the summer between junior and senior year and into the fall, we wanted to sort of pause and dispel some of those other myths that we talk to families about. And the first is the idea of a student being a really great writer, and because of that they don't need support. And it can be really great to work with a student who is a strong writer and has a really distinct voice. That can be a great asset in an essay. But the best essays aren't always the most well written. They're going to be the most personal and personally insightful, where an admissions officer can read the essay and get a sense of who the student is and who they're going to be on their campus, which isn't necessarily going to be conveyed by flawless narrative structure, great creative voice. These can be assets to the essay, but a well-written essay without a soul that doesn't show who the student is still isn't going to serve the student well in that process. Writing the personal statement, after all, is a specific genre, and that leads us to this next myth, this idea of my student is already writing their essay in English class, so their English teacher is going to help with them with that, and that is great. The issue here is that the personal statement is a distinct genre. It's meant to convey certain information in a certain way that makes it easily accessible for the admissions officer reading it and conveys that in a compelling way. It's not just going to be a personal memoir. And as someone who taught a lot of literature and English myself, knowing the genre inside and out is something that can be really crucial to helping a student succeed in it. So while we certainly don't want to rain on the parade of any English teachers out there, I think we all have a great deal of respect for the work that they do. It can sometimes be helpful to bring in a specialist in that particular genre so that your student is able to convey what it is that they need to convey. The next component here, Kevin has already alluded to the how and why of starting essays early, working over the summer to set a student up for success so they don't feel like they're taking AP college essay writing in the fall of their senior year. But year after year, we have parents tell us that the guidance counselor has said that there's no pressure to start drafting until the fall. This is entirely false. The Common App personal statement prompts have been released since pretty late this year. I think it was late February, early March this year, but those prompts have already been out. Many schools start to release their supplement prompts over the course of the summer, and 99% of them are released by August 1st. I'm looking at you, MIT, stop releasing your prom slate. But guidance counselors don't work over the summer. And this is about hoping their students will work on their schedule rather than a schedule that is most conducive for the student. So starting early is going to be really crucial here. And this last one, I'm going to punt this to our former admissions officers here. So does the essay need to have really sophisticated vocabulary? Should we be whipping out our thesauruses here?
Please do not. The fuller answer is please don't, because ultimately colleges really just want to hear from you as you are writing and as you have the language right now. A lot of colleges will require students to take, probably within the first semester or two, a college writing course where they will then teach you how to write in the style of a college student, whether it be a research paper, an argumentative essay, anything else of the sort. So they will give you the tools to write well. Right now, they just want to hear your voice and determine what type of student you are on campus. So if you're tripping over yourself to use big fancy words because you think that's going to be impressive, it will largely detract from what you're trying to do, which is convey who you are as a human being.
Yeah, and I mean, colleges aren't looking for your college essay to be a writing sample. There's other places in your application where they can kind of get a sense of your academic capabilities, your English capabilities, right? Standardized testing, your transcript, elsewhere there. So, as Jordan's kind of indicated, and I co-sign on, right? They're more just looking to get a sense of who you are and how you fit in on campus.
Of the other major components to the essay is this idea of, we call it packaging. We know students aren't Twinkies, but when we talk about packaging, we're not talking about crinkly cellophane and cardboard boxes, but making sure that all of the students' stories get told, whether that's in a letter of recommendation, the personal statement, some of the supplement essays that a student will have to write, or additional optional sections of the Common App. So what we'll be discussing for most of the rest of the this webinar are those components and how we attack each of them in turn. And I'm going to start off by talking just very briefly about the optional sections in the Common App. And this is actually one of the places where we've seen a little bit of movement over this past application season. The Common App that rising seniors will fill out will have two differences to it when it comes to the additional information section. Namely, that what was called the community disruption section was renamed. The language got a little bit more specific to showcase the broad range of things that could impact a student's academic or extracurricular career in high school. And then they shortened up the additional information section. So let's talk about the additional information section first. This section is truly 100% optional. 90 to 95% of our students don't fill out this section. It's not one of those, if you wanted to show the colleges you'd really care, you'd fill it out. Don't write another personal statement here. This is an opportunity to provide specific extra information that an admissions officer needs to know that isn't going to show up anywhere else in the application. This may be extra activities that don't fit in the 10 slots of the activities section, an elaboration on an activity that commands a lot of a student's time. For instance, if your student is running a small business that is truly like a huge chunk of their life and it commands massive amounts of their time, maybe this isn't something that can be accurately described in 150 words. That's a great use of the additional information section. It also may be a place to give context around a school-specific award or honor. You may notice that most of these are fairly neutral or perhaps even positive. additions to the application, but admissions officers are people and they understand that a student's academic and extracurricular life is going to be affected by things outside of their control. And that is what the challenges and circumstances question was designed to allow students to speak to give context to personal or academic challenges that they experienced throughout high school, whether that's physical or mental health challenges, personal or family circumstances, or school specific academic challenges or changes in your learning environment. If there is a change in an instructor and you end up with an instructor who isn't qualified in some way, that is something that is outside of a student's control. And the way that these get addressed is in as neutral, informative, and objective way as possible. What happened? When did it happen? How did it affect you, the student? How has it resolved? And what have you done to help address this issue? Think of it more so as a footnote rather than an essay overall. It doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to explain what happened. Some of our other essays are going to be more traditionally essays in this case, but I'll let some of my colleagues take us through that.
So when we start to think about brainstorming for your personal statement and really for every other part of your essay as well, this is really the most important part of this process. Getting all of the stories, all of the ideas down on the page will only help us have a broader view and broader sense as to what we can actually work with when we're starting to think about some of these essays. The key question we ask all of our students is, what do we need to know about you? This can be truly anything, and any answer here is valid. We want students to write everything down. Some of our colleagues say everything from the serious to the silly. Truly talk about the high academic awards, the funny story in a canoe, truly everything. Because we want to see what experiences there are and what sort of stories that students have that exemplify who they are as people. We also want to get to the core of why these things are important to them. They spent all this time thinking about all of these stories and examples. What's the meaning behind them? Answering the question of, again, what do we need to know about you can be really important for us here too. And this is where parents are especially awesome because at the very least, you remember everything you have driven your students to. Every brand practice, every friend hangout, every trip to the mall, everything, everything, everything. I'm dating myself because I'm sure students don't go and hang out at the mall anymore. At the same time, though, this is a time to bring in family, bring in friends, and have them tell the stories that exemplify their students as well. So the brainstorming process is incredibly collaborative, and these sources can come, and these stories rather, can come from anywhere. There are two main places we think. Think about your resume or the student's resume. Again, activities, jobs, volunteering, anything that's quote unquote impressive that students probably default to when they're thinking about college essay topics. But what we're sometimes more interested in and often more interested in is your toast topics. If someone was giving a toast to talking about your student or you and how amazing you are, they would mention your passions, your hobbies, the traditions and experiences that showcase who you are as a human being and why you are getting this award or getting this toast, right? So we want both of these things because both of these topics and the stories that are coming from them are going to be helpful in either the personal statement or later on in the supplemental essay brainstorming and writing process as well. So while there are no wrong answers by any means, there are more and less helpful brainstormings as well. I'm going to highlight our wonderful Alyssa Coltrane here. She willingly put herself up for interpretation. This is 17-year-old Alyssa's brainstorming, or what it would have been had she been going through the process, right, Alyssa?
Yes, please be nice to me, Jordan.
I absolutely will. Do not worry. I will highlight that, yes, we have a lot of really great facts about Alyssa here, right? All these things are true. She's an AP Lit. She plays a violin. She has an older brother. She likes to travel. She used to drive a gold Malibu. That's great. I don't know really anything about her, though. I don't understand why these things are important to her. I don't understand why she likes hanging out with her friends. What does she do when she hangs out with her friends? How does she look after her friends? What does that mean? These are all types of follow-up questions that we will probably be answer or asking 17-year-old Alyssa as we move forward with this process. Especially because when we do start to dig in and do start to get in some of these details, we then start to unearth the stories that are really meaningful and impactful. So now we know that she played the violin and she's second chair of the orchestra. That's great. Maybe that can be something that we're thinking of for an activity essay later down the line, if that's something that's really important to her. Now, instead of just taking after her friends, or rather looking after her friends, we know that she's the mom friend. She has snacks and band-aids and chopstick and an extra charger in her backpack. Was that true, Alyssa? Did you actually carry all that stuff?
Yes, I absolutely carried all of those things around. I even used to carry a deck of cards around because we had a period of time where I had a lot of study halls and it was the only way I could keep people entertained. So I got very good at playing cards.
And see, questions like these and details like these are what we start to have conversations with students about. I particularly really like the Gold Malibu story. His name is Dante. Is there a reason why his name was Dante?
So in that case, the Malibu also had leather seats. And unless you were a morning person who got to school super early, I was not, you ended up parking in direct sunlight. So after by the time school was done, the inside of that car was a literal inferno. And that is where the name came from. So I would actually end up standing out in the parking lot with my friend, who I gave a ride home, every day with all of the doors open on this car, waiting for it to cool down enough that I could actually go and get in and put my hands on the wheel.
That sounds horrifying, but it sounds like a really good way to talk about your relationship with this friend and maybe the conversations you were able to have with them over the hood of the car or over the roof of the car as you waited for this car to cool down. So again, these are types of conversations and types of brainstorming questions that we'll be asking students to try and draw out these stories, to find where they are, the deck of cards being the mom friend. Maybe there's a story behind, again, the orchestra or AP Euro or a class or something like that, right? Finding little details is really what we're looking for to really dig into finding out who these students are. So again, there's the true brainstorming and then the brainstorming where you're getting those details and you're getting those specifics about the student as well.
Because as we do that, we are looking for specific things that we hope to capture in the essay. And I think one of the things that I love about working as a collaborative team is we all come into this process with a slightly different take on what we want, a great personal statement to capture. For me, I'm always looking to see the student in conversation or in community with somebody else, to see them doing something so I know what kind of friend, roommate, lab partner they're going to be on that campus. And when I say lab partner, I don't necessarily mean like tell me how much you love biology. There are essays where we can do that. But are you the person who's going to stay behind and help the TA wash out the petri dishes after the lab? Are you going to be setting up study groups? Who are you going to be on our campus? Jordan, did you want to tell me a little bit about what you look for in an essay?
Yeah, as my days in a former mission officer, I feel like I read enough essays to know what I had hoped that there was something in, rather, that I wished that students would put into essays. And for me, it can be encompassed in the question of so what? You went to the place, you did the thing, you feel this way, so what? Why is this important to you? You just spent 600 words talking about this event, these series of ways you think. Why is this important to you? Why is this something that means something to you? And any way that you can share that, in any way that you can highlight that in an essay, to me, makes it a really successful essay that conveys who you are as a human being.
For sure. I mean, speaking from the admissions end as well, I started off sort of the webinar talking about there's certain things you don't control, institutional priorities being one of them, right? And so I honestly think the best essays like get me as an admissions officer to start thinking about your perspective and who you are rather than a number, right? In the examples we just talked about, it would be great to read an essay where I think of Alyssa as like the mom friend or like the person with a distinct like eye for detail from their time at the gavel instead of applicant number 1157 from Pennsylvania, right? Because one gets me thinking about them as a person, how they fit into my class. The other, you're at the mercy of an institutional priority at that university.
So, as you can see, because each of us just gave you three entirely different answers about what makes a good personal statement, there isn't a set formula except for the essay needing to be authentic to who the student is and showing who they are, because ultimately admissions officers are people. They want to connect with students, and they are, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong, either of you, looking for reasons to root for a student, to accept that student. And ultimately, that's what a really great personal statement is going to allow them to do, to connect with a student, to root for them, and ultimately, hopefully, admit them at the end of this process. So these are some of the things that make a good essay. But of course, there's the flip side to this as well. What makes a bad essay? And I'm going to start with these three ideas, and then we're going to nuance this just a little bit more. Bad essays are going to be the things that are not personal. They may be essays about, you know, a rant-prone topic, politics, religion. It may be something that is more about other people than the student, sibling rivalries, divorce, the death of a grandparent, or a cliched narrative. Um, we have many students who come to us wanting to write about sports or their experience with camp. And while these experiences are, valuable and often essential to the student developing a sense of who they are, because these are experiences that many students share, it becomes easy to write an essay that ends up being very similar to one of the hundreds of other essays about practicing hard and winning the big game, or losing the big game and realizing that actually what mattered was the teamwork and hard work you put in along the way. So, that being said, there are still good essays about all of those topics, but they need to be distinctly personal. I'll I'll take politics as an example here. Um, you should not write your personal statement about a political topic, giving your opinion about a political topic. But if you've interned with a local politician, if you have specific stories about how something impacted you and what you did about it, if you can show how this reflects who you are as a person. If you can take that sports essay and drill down until we're talking about not just learning how to pitch, but the exact number of inches you managed to get your slider to drop over the course of working on it over 6 months, and how that attention to detail and understanding that small things add up shows up in everywhere else in your life, then you have an essay that no other student could write. And that's ultimately going to be what admissions officers are looking for. It's not about having something terrible happen to you. It's not about having cured cancer. You could cure cancer and write a really bad personal statement. We even had a student at one point who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And while that is deeply impressive, the only thing that told us about the student was about his cardiovascular capability, and he wasn't getting recruited for track, so it didn't matter. We advised that student to write about learning from the friends he had in the band and what he'd learned from each of them, not only in the sense of learning to love other types of music, but about being patient and trying again and showing up for others, and it ended up working out really well for him. So that's giving us just a little overview of how we would brainstorm for all of our major essay types. But next, we're going to take you through what each of those essay types are.
Yeah. So through this process, you or your student, your child will end up writing more essays than you care for. There's different essay types that are all outlined here. We'll review the personal statement first since it's the biggest one, and that's the one in the Common App that goes to most of the universities you'll apply to. But something I do want to point out about these other essay types, right? Why college, why major, community diversity, important activity, and other miscellaneous questions that universities ask specifically on their own. Those supplemental essay types are important too, because I can speak from experience here. If we took the time as an admissions office to think about what we wanted for our incoming class, to really kind of work together and figure it out, and we wanted to ask a specific question of applicants into our university for the incoming class, like we were very deliberate in that process, right? We are asking that for a reason. So taking the time to consider that essay and what you bring to the table and responding to that prompt is really important. So, yeah, let's start first then with the personal statement. So, it's also commonly referred to as a Common App essay, right? It is the longer 650-word essay that is a part of your overall Common App. Um, for that essay, the approach we tell students to take is to not focus on prompts. There are prompts. You can look them up on the Common App's website. But a few things to keep in mind, they are guidelines. Instead we tell students to focus on just sort of having an open mind while brainstorming, sharing all the stories that they have, letting their ideas flow instead of trying to force it to fit a narrative, because prompt number 7, which is listed here, is truly open-ended. It is asking you to share an essay on any topic of your choice. So you can truly write about anything. So it's more important to think about, just like who you are and how to get that on the page than it is to fit something into a box.
So outside of the personal statement, that 650-word essay that's going to go to almost every college that you apply to, the most common type of supplement essay is going to be what we call a why college essay. We gave 2 examples here, one from the University of Michigan and one from Davidson College, but you're going to see variations on this theme at a variety of universities, whether that's, University of Wisconsin, University of Pennsylvania, among others. And in this case, there are really 2 components that schools are looking for in these essays. The first of which is usually, what do you want to study? And there's a simple answer to that, and then there's the more complicated, more personal answer, which is ultimately what admissions officers are looking for here. This is not just a moment to mention the major you want to declare, but to tie in past experiences, to talk about meaningful moments from class, and to consider future goals. I'll take one of our most common majors as an example. We have many students who come to us and go, I want to study biology. But the question there is why? Is it that you want to study biology because you remember participating in the Riverkeeper network with a parent when you were a kid and going to the Schuylkill River and counting mayfly larvae? Or you remember counting turtles when you went kayaking in the lake by your house. Those are past experiences that inform your motivation for doing something. You then have meaningful moments from class. Was there a project that you completed on water quality, a research paper that you did on EPA regulations and how that affected the endangered species? Was there something in AP environmental science? Because all of that ties into your future goals. in this example, maybe you're looking at biology as a way of doing conservation, of working with wildlife. Because for a student who wants to go into medicine, for instance, those stories and that motivation and the way they've gone about pursuing it is going to be very different and produce an essay that is nuanced and specific. So the example I gave here is, it's a fairly straightforward one. We have a declared major, but not every student is going to know what they want to study. And that is 100% okay. It is all right to apply undecided. Um, but you cannot apply uninterested. The goal for these essays when a student is applying undecided is to display intellectually that moment when you walk into a Chinese buffet and you go, oh God, I'm going to end up leaving here, having to let out a notch in my belt because everything looks amazing. Display your multitude of interests. Speculate about what it is you might want to study. Don't say you have no idea. And this is a moment for students who are undecided and students who are not, where it's all right to speculate. A Y college essay is not a contract. No one is going to show up, and once again, Kevin and Jordan, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but I don't imagine either of you ever showed up to a sophomore dorm room and went, you said you were going to be a political science major and you're not. Get out.
No, I see
You
a pretty significant number of students change their major during their undergrad experience. That is baked in. So yeah, I mean, you're not signing a contract. It's okay. It's okay that you don't know. We're more focused on you demonstrating passion, intellectual curiosity, intellectual interest that shows you really fit in well here at our university.
And one of the ways that we help students do that in this process is we work with students to essentially create a mission statement, identifying problems that they want to learn how to solve, or burning questions that they want to discover the answers to. For our student who's really into wildlife, that may be something like, why do I see fewer turtles now than I did when I was 8 years old? For a student who's interested in economics, it may be something about the intersection between home buying and interest rates. What are the things that drive you that you want to study something in order to address? We help students think through the past experiences that sparked their interest, the coursework, projects, or research that is relevant, and we help them connect that to their future goals. And that helps them articulate really well this first half of the Y college essay. This is the you part of the student, part of the essay, but the other part of a Y college essay is showing not just who you are, but how you would fit in on their campus and take advantage of the opportunities that are available to that student. And part of that is really getting into research. We provide a lot of resources to our students to help them jumpstart that process, but this can be researching the school's website. We know school websites are terribly designed. Google is your friend here. Google University of Michigan course catalog. Don't try and navigate there from their homepage. That could be YouTube. That you can connect, you can look at YouTube videos. My apologies, my Apple phone decided to start yelling at me very briefly. You can take a look at YouTube videos, whether it's the school or the, published by students on campus. College visits are a great way to do this. Take specific notes. But if there's a question that you're struggling having finding an answer to, feel free to email a professor or email admissions officer if you have specific questions. And I think Jordan and Kevin, you guys had some tips about how to do that specifically, right?
Yeah, I would say make sure that the questions that you are asking are ones that you actually want to know the answers to. And I think that is really worth re-emphasizing. There is a thing called demonstrated interest where students are encouraged to interact with colleges and universities more often because that is a factor in admission decisions later. We have a couple webinars that talk about that as well, and you can check that out on our Google page or on our rather YouTube page. Um, However, if a school doesn't care about demonstrated interest, reaching out to them for the specific question that you're looking to answer because you looked on the website, you attended an information session, for example, and you still didn't get the answer, that's a perfectly valid reason to reach out. And Kevin, feel free to weigh in for yourself here, but I was always happy to answer questions that students legitimately had questions about, right? We would absolutely, send them the information that they needed to. But ultimately, reaching out to admission officers should be for your benefit, not necessarily for theirs. Make sure that you're getting the information you need to write the best essay and have the information to make a good decision for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were always happy to field questions from parents, students, families. And it's not obviously like specific why college stuff, but even stuff about, the admissions process, right? Because we want you to apply ultimately at the end of the day. So we're happy to field those questions. Don't feel uncomfortable calling an admissions office or emailing or whatever sort of options that you do have. And I mean, the only thing the snippet I will give folks is that, hey, if it's a week before an application deadline or after an application deadline, that's not you may not be able to get a hold of someone in a timely manner. So that's one of the reasons we encourage you also to think about these things a little bit in advance so you can reach out and get those questions answered in a timely way. Because in admissions offices, we obviously have very little bandwidth at those points in time.
All right. And we're going to very briefly touch on just some of the other types of essays. Some of those are going to be activity essays, ones where a student is asked to unpack the activity that matters the most to them. For instance, if we're still, choosing to pick on 17-year-old me, a applying to the University of Florida with an activity essay about the gavel might be a great place to showcase that story, and it means I don't have to write about it in my personal statement. But you also have the opportunity to talk about how your community affected your upbringing, or just some really interesting, sort of wacky prompts. The University of Chicago is notorious for that. We always have a good time looking them over when they come out. The University of Vermont used to ask what type of ice cream flavor you would be. So when it comes to supplement essays, there are a wide range of essay questions that a student could be asked, but they're often going to fall into those categories.
So you're convinced that you'd like to at least have a conversation with some of us. What does that actually look like, and how do we support our students? We coach students from beginning to end in this process. We are truly here every single step of the way, providing guidance on everything having to do with the college essay writing process, as well as the application process as well. However, we really emphasize that students need to be the one writing the essays. Admission officers, again, speaking from experience, and I'm sure Kevin can attest, admission officers are very good at picking up when the essay is not written by a 17-year-old and when two 30-somethings have had their fingers all over it. So we always encourage students to write their entire essay and to make sure that they are the ones showcasing their voice along with our questions and guidance all along the way. We'll set deadlines and make sure that this process is broken down into manageable chunks as well. We'll do a final proofread as well, while also helping them revise their essay along the way. We also help students with their essays and applications as well. We want to make sure that everything they're putting on the Common Application having to do with the written components are going to be accurate in representing who they are as a human being, Again, Alyssa talked about packaging. You're not a sandwich or a cookie, but you're a human being. And we want to make sure that we're presenting all the information that we need to share the fullest picture of who you are. So we'll help students with particularly the activities section, as well as the additional information and the challenges and circumstances section as well. We're not just providing the strategic and practical support, but also that emotional support as well. This is a really challenging time in your life, and we understand that. The stakes are high, but our job here is to make sure the temperature is lowered. If you have questions, if there's something that you do not understand about this process or that a college emailed you about, we're here for you as well. And we're also here to make sure that you're doing this work on time and we keep them organized. We keep the students organized. We'll make sure that there's a fluid back and forth as well as communication. Parents and guardians and anybody else who wants to be involved will be CC'd on emails, as well as being a part of this process too. As I mentioned at the beginning with brainstorming, parents and friends are always great resources for that brainstorming process, but we'll always make sure that everybody is involved and kept in the loop for where we are throughout the process as well. When you do start working with us, we end up sending you a Google Drive full of information that is yours to use for as long as you would like it. This is where we'll store all of our documents, along with some resources that, again, are free for you to use as soon as you start working with us. Everything from choosing and visiting colleges to thinking about testing and applying. There's also then places for the getting to know you documents, as well as final drafts. So you can go in there and quickly access them to then put them into the Common Application itself. We then have lots of information about the Common Application activity description. We have not only a sample Common App worksheet, but we also then have a worksheet that your student will fill out that mimics the activities and education sections directly, specifically. We'll help them flesh out those activities and think about which 10 to include. If they have more than 10, we'll help them again suss out which 10, and then also think about the order, generally thinking top half, bottom half, things like that. We also have resources around the college list. We're happy to have one-to-one conversations rather about specific schools, and if they like schools in the Northeast, in small towns, then we can start to rattle off schools that might fit within their criteria. However, if they're thinking about looking on their own and having conversation as a family as well, you have lots of resources here as in the form of one-pagers, as well as a college visit guide when you do visit campuses to start thinking about how to take notes while you're on that campus. And finally, there's some information about letters of recommendation as well, and resumes and everything else that has to do with this process as well. If a student does want to fill out a resume, which is typically not required, we're happy to take a look at it and proof that as well. But again, all these resources are yours to make sure that you have the information you need to be successful in this process.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Jordan, Kevin, and myself are going to stick around for as long as you need to answer any questions that you have. I've already seen a couple of questions come in, but if there is a question you would like to ask, please use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions so we can get those tackled. If you have any other question that is, personal to your student, please feel free to reach out to us either via the consultation links that we have shared in the chat or by reaching out to us at either of the the email address or the phone number on the screen. All right. So one of the first questions here that we can take a look at is going to be, let's see. Jordan and Kevin, this one specifically asks about admissions officers, so I'll let you two take this. What are admissions officers saying about AI in regard to college essays?
I would say first and foremost that this is still a very human process, that humans are still reading your essays in college admission offices around the country. It is still a very personal experience where you send in your application, you're sending it over to a person who's going to read it, and then a committee, a bunch of other people are then also going to make that decision. So it's something that they're definitely aware of. It's becoming a little bit more aware of in the the kind of general, I guess, knowledge, collective knowledge of the admission world. But overall, they want to emphasize that this is still a very human process, and we hope on the other side that students are then using their own human brains in order to write their essays as well.
Right. And so it's one of the things that we mentioned earlier is how the idea that like the essays you send in aren't a writing sample, right? The AI is one of those things, one of the factors. It's not the only, not the only factor. It's one of the factors that drives that. Universities like Duke have explicitly said, like, this is not a writing sample. We're not looking at it that way. So that benefit of something like a chat GPT, which does like create smooth language for a prompt you put in, won't really serve your purpose, right? A language model can't grasp like who you are, like we talked about, the traditions you have, the funny stories you've experienced, your nicknames that like your aunt has for you, right? And to be able to find a succinct angle to communicate about that to an admissions office. So it's one of those things that like we're aware of it. Admissions offices are aware of it. They've talked about it. Um, to the degree that's in use, there is some limited use of AI to do like triage, so like maybe filter out folks about below a certain GPA, stuff like that. But it's very limited the use right now. As Jordan said, all decisions are being made by humans. Humans are still reading your applications, and you should keep that in mind.
All right, perfect. And I think people are eager to talk to you two. I've got another one for you. Do admissions officers give any weight to applications that are submitted earlier in the window? So in this case, I'm going to briefly give some context for anyone who's may not be sure what that means, and then I'll hand it over to you two. So, depending on the school, there are going to be certain specific deadlines that students have to meet. Perhaps the most straightforward are going to be early decision, early action, and regular decision. Early decision has the notable differentiation of being binding, but otherwise, in all of these cases, there is a set deadline, and after that deadline, admissions officers begin to review the applications that they have received. So there is no advantage or disadvantage, except you are depriving yourself of extra time that you may or may not need when it comes to submitting a regular decision application early or submitting an early action application early. But Jordan and Kevin, I'd love it if you two could speak to rolling admissions policies and how applying early affects that.
Right. And this is an example of how, for some of these questions, there's no one size fit all answer. Some universities have rolling admissions practices, and they'll usually be very direct in saying so, which means they'll have a set timeline, maybe a few weeks within you submitting your application, right, that they'll review it and make a decision about it. And for those universities, there is a benefit, right? Because their decision is made in context of like the number of seats they have available, right? And there's a slightly better, I mean, it's not universal, but in many cases, there's a slightly better chance of getting merit aid, right? So for role universities where you're applying on a rolling admission basis, there is a benefit. But outside that, right, it's not really one. But to be clear, hey, if you're done, you're done, right? And you're ready to submit. And as always, we wouldn't encourage you to submit, even though you do get extra time, right? We would not encourage students to submit all their applications the deadline day, right? Just in case the Common App crashes or some other incident happens. So, you can take your time for non-rolling admissions, but don't wait until the absolute last minute.
And even for schools that do have rolling admissions, their definition of what early looks like will vary among the institutions. For example, if the Common App opens on August 1st, and that's the first day you can start submitting applications, that does not mean that that is the only time, or only early time to do it. For example, we usually call the University of Pittsburgh, where a lot of our students apply, and they usually say somewhere around September is still considered early on their end. So we don't sacrifice quality for speed. We want to make sure we're taking an extra week or so to make sure that the essay is where it needs to be before we then can give the green light to say, here you go. You can now apply to your rolling schools.
Perfect. Thank you both. We also had a question about, do you advise repurposing essays across different colleges that ask similar questions? And I'll answer that one. In a word, yes, but with a certain amount of intentional and deliberate repurposing. Depending on the specific essay prompts, a student may be able to take a good portion of a previous essay and reuse it. For instance, if we have our student who really wants to study wildlife quality and count turtles and that sort of thing, and they're applying to both Michigan and Davidson, the first half of that essay, the one that talks about being part of Riverkeeper and AP Environmental Science and research projects about water quality, that's going to be the same. Why the student studies what they want to study isn't going to vary from school to school. What will vary is how the specific school offers opportunities and meets specific needs. So, what we do when we work with students is we help them to think through essays and work through them in an order that makes sense so that they can, take that, you know, that core kernel about who they are and what they want to study and use it effectively and efficiently across each of their essays.
I'd like to add on to that, yes, but I totally co-sign everything Alyssa said there, and a great sort of explanation for how we support students. Uh, while you can and you should, where possible, repurpose. Um, if you One of the reasons we encourage students to start early is because in some cases it's worth at least having a think about whether you'd want to do that. For example, maybe if you're repurposing an essay for Boston College, maybe you want to take a slightly different angle but to sort of connect with their Jesuit heritage, right? Because they love talking about that at Boston College. And you've deprived yourself of the opportunity to sort of think about that, maybe pivot a little bit, if you're doing all this the week before it's due, right? So it is it is one of the reasons why we encourage you to kind of start earlier, to work with someone who's a little bit of a subject matter expert, so you can at least have a think on potential exceptions to that general rule.
All right, perfect. And I think we have one last question here, but if there's something you've been thinking over, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A. Jordan and Kevin, I know we spoke about this a little bit over the course of the presentation, but can you tell us a little bit more about, what an admissions officer is looking for in the essays, maybe across either the personal statement or the supplements?
This really comes down to an amorphous idea of fit. Are you a good fit for the institution? Are you a good fit for the major or the field or the school that you are applying to within the institution? And they're using these words to determine how you're going to be on their campus. The personal statement specifically is showcasing your personality. Are you someone who's going to be the mom friend like Alyssa's brainstorming was? Are you going to be taking care of others? Are you going to be a part of a community that you're going to jump fully into and really engage with? Those are all things that are positives that most colleges want to foster on their campuses. So whichever way you can articulate the things that are authentic to you and how you see the world and how you will be on their campus really is the number one thing, from my opinion, for what a college is looking for in the personal statement. The supplemental essays do then get a little bit more specific, as we were talking about, in highlighting how you are, again, going to be an academic fit for their campus. If they're asking about academics, if they're asking about a community that you're a part of, what type of, again, community member are you going to be? They're really just trying to get more narrow information in the supplemental essays that are more specific to their schools. Whereas the personal statement is more general, more speaking about who you are as a human, where again, those supplemental essays are meant to showcase who you are in the classroom, in the community, things like that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Jordan, and it sort of goes back to the fundamentals of what you have control of, what can they learn about you in these essays, right? Because we know about your academic track record from your transcript. We know that you enjoy soccer because you played varsity all 4 years in your activities list. Um, but this is an opportunity to like, if we have, we would love as admissions officers to like truly sit down with you and get to know every single applicant. But there's constraints of time and space, right? And that isn't the case. So this is really the opportunity to do that with these essays.
All right, I think that is the last of our questions for the evening. Thank you for spending this Thursday evening with us. We'll be sending out the YouTube link as part of our follow-up. Please feel free to share this with anyone who you think might find this information useful. And have a good night.